Okay, this is your nervous system notes. The first thing we're going to talk about is your protective layers that surround the brain. The first is the dura mater, which is the outermost layer, followed by the arachnoid mater, the middle layer, and it resembles a spider. It does not have blood vessels. And then you have your pia mater, which is your inner membrane, which does contain the nerves and blood vessels that nourish the brain. In this image, the dura mater is being peeled away. And in this image, you can see that a subdural hematoma, where it would be and how it would affect the brain. In this image, the dura mater has also been peeled away. The first part of the central nervous system is the spinal cord, which passes down the vertebral canal and has 31 segments. Each segment has a pair of spinal nerves. The cervical nerves supply to the upper limbs, and the lumbar nerves go to the lower limbs. And the function of these are to conduct nerve impulses and serve as a center for spinal reflexes. Impulses from the spinal cord travel up to the brain. Those are ascending or sensory impulses. And then they travel back down to go to the muscles, which would be descending or motor reflexes. For spinal reflexes, the reflex arcs pass through the spinal cord, which is what the gentleman was talking about with the knee-jerk reflex. First, we're going to talk about some anatomical regions, the three anatomical regions of the brain: the cerebrum, the cerebellum, and the brainstem. The cerebellum is this lower part of the brain here, and it serves as your balance and coordination center. The cerebrum is the large, wrinkly part of the brain, and it serves for higher mental function. And the brainstem is the lower part of the brain that stems from the spinal cord, and that regulates your visceral functions or your involuntary autonomic system. So we have your cerebellum, your cerebrum, and your brainstem here, all in different colors. In your cerebrum, you have two hemispheres, the left and right side, that are separated by your corpus callosum, which is this section, and that connects the two hemispheres. It can actually be cut, and that sometimes does happen with seizure patients to try to stop the seizures. The left and right hemispheres have different functions, and we took that test today. And here's a picture of the corpus callosum in a sheep's brain. In the cerebrum, there are wrinkles and grooves. A fissure is a deep groove, like this one here. Sulci are the shallow grooves, all throughout here, and then these are the gyri, or the bumps. The fissure's function is to separate the lobes. The longitudinal fissure is number 2, which separates the left and right sides. The transverse fissure separates the cerebrum from the cerebellum, and the lateral fissure separates the temporal lobe from the frontal and parietal. The frontal lobe here is reasoning, thinking, and language. The parietal is where you process touch, pain, and the relation of your body parts. The temporal lobe is where you process your hearing. And the occipital lobe is where you process vision. The cerebral cortex is the thin layer of gray matter that's the outermost portion of the cerebrum, or the part with all the wrinkles. And here are some of the functional aspects of the different areas. Ventricles of the brain are the fluid-filled cavities. They contain cerebrospinal fluid, which is fluid that supports and protects the brain. The brain also has different functional regions: motor areas, sensory areas, and association areas. Motor areas control voluntary movements. The right side of the brain generally controls the left side of the body, and they also have the Broca's areas, which is for speech. The sensory area is involved in feelings and sensations, like your 5 senses. And then association areas are for higher levels of thinking, interpreting information, and analyzing it. Now we're going to talk about the brainstem and the different parts. The top of the brainstem has the diencephalon, the thalamus and the hypothalamus, and then the brainstem is below. The brainstem itself consists of the midbrain, pons, and medulla oblongata. The diencephalon, which is directly above, has the hypothalamus and the thalamus. The hypothalamus literally means below the thalamus. Hypothalamus controls your hormones, heart rate, blood pressure, body temperature, and hunger, while the thalamus is the relay station that sends those signals to the brain. The optic tract goes from the eyes to the brain. You can see the sinuses here. The nerves cross over at the chiasma. Here's your brainstem with the diencephalon on the top. The midbrain controls visual reflexes and eye movements. The pons relays sensory information, and the medulla oblongata controls heart, respiration, and blood pressure. Your pituitary gland, which is here, below the hypothalamus, is the master gland of the endocrine system and controls the majority of your hormones. We'll talk about that more when we get to the endocrine system. Here's our sheep's brain again. So we have our corpus callosum, thalamus, a pineal gland, which is another gland within the brain, and your hypothalamus. Below those, we have the midbrain, pons, and medulla oblongata. And here's another example of that. Another part of the brain is called the hippocampus. It looks like a seahorse, which is why it's called the hippocampus, and plays a major role in your memories. The limbic system plays a role in your emotion. It also includes the olfactory lobes, which is why memory, emotion, and smell are so closely linked. For example, Crayolas today are created with the same scent so that they remind people of their childhood. The reason for this is evolutionary, because pheromones are tied to emotions and behavior. So we used to classify memory as being long-term or short-term. The new classification is 4 memory systems that process information differently. So here is a flowchart of that. So in long-term memory, you have explicit memory, which is conscious, declarative, and then episodic and semantic. Or you have implicit unconscious memory and procedural, with skills and tasks. Episodic memory involves remembering personal experiences, like a phone conversation or a movie that you watched. You can see the example below. Semantic memory manages the storage and retrieval of general facts, like the number of days in a week or the colors in a rainbow. Naming objects is also semantic. Procedural memories allows us to learn activities and skills that will be performed automatically with little or no conscious thought. And then finally, working memory provides temporary storage and manipulation of the information necessary for cognitive tasks like language, comprehension, learning, and reasoning. So those are your notes for Part B of the nervous system. Write down any questions you have and bring them to class next time. Thanks.